Greetings, class. I'm filming this at the beginning of week 5 of the semester, and I wanted to take an opportunity in a few minutes to introduce you to not just the articles that you're to read for this week, but also discuss a little bit about the discussion questions that you need to respond to. If you haven't already looked specifically for week 5, the discussion question is very broad. And it's broad by design. That's on purpose. And what that means is that you're going to simply have to utilize the reading for the weeks, or the reading for this week rather, in order to create an informed response. I think I should also share with you that myself and Dr. Lowenkamp are co-authors on a couple of these pieces. And so it would behoove you to read them closely because, as I stated before, we know what's in the article. So it's obvious whether or not you're using the material appropriately or not. Notice there are 3 articles that you need to read for this week. The first one discusses the risk and need principles. Those are 2 principles that you've already been introduced to via the Bonta article. And I want to discuss just very briefly the risk and need principles are 2 principles that are couched within a broader set of things that are known as the principles of effective intervention, or PEI. And we're going to discuss a lot of aspects of the principles of effective intervention. Now, the risk principle and the need principle are 2 principles that are considered evidence-based practices, or again, PEI, principles of effective intervention. And the first piece that I just referred to by Lowenkamp, Peeler, Smith, and Latessa investigates investigates the extent to which agencies adhere to these principles and whether or not adherence to those principles matter. It's a very important issue because it has to do not only with testing the principles of risk and need, which are very important to the implementation of effective supervision and effective programming, but it also addresses the issue of program integrity. All right. For example, it's one thing to say that you're doing something; it's quite another to do it well or not, as the case may be. So bear in mind that first article has to do with the extent to which agencies are implementing or adhering to the principles of risk and need, which means you're going to have to display a thorough understanding of the risk principle, a thorough understanding of the need principle, and know what that article finds out and what the implications are. Another article by Lowenkamp, Flores, Holsinger, Makarios, and Latessa discusses ISP, which stands for Intensive Supervision Program. That piece examines specifically program philosophy. In other words, that piece determines the extent to which a supervision agency adheres to a specific philosophy of punishment or philosophy of intervention. Another very important issue in community corrections that's been investigated over the last several decades, and very important to understand in order to have a broad knowledge base of community corrections. So please pay attention to that article as well, because again, that article examines the agency and the extent to which philosophy matters. Now, philosophy is something that we discussed previously with varying degrees of success. So we're going to revisit in that piece. The third piece is known as the STAR article. It's a 24-month follow-up rearrest study by Lowenkamp, Holsinger, Robinson, and Alexander. And that article looks specifically at a program, a training that supervision officers experience that is supposed to impart skills that matter. All right, in other words, the training is supposed to teach skills that will help community supervision officers shape behavior. Now, getting to the question for the week. The question, if you haven't already seen it, states, now that you have read 5 articles that deal specifically with skills-based supervision. So keep in mind you've already read or should have read 2 articles from week 4 dealing specifically with officer skills, officer practice. The Trotter article and the Bonta et al. Article. And again, I want to state very plainly that those 2 articles, the Trotter article and the Bonta et al. Article, really represent, they are investigating a real sea change, a significant paradigm shift in the profession of community supervision. As I mentioned in one of my previous videos, for decades, nearly a century, community supervision looked largely the same. Until the mid-2000s, so about 2004 forward, some innovations, some researchers and practitioners came together and created some innovations, and specifically I'm referring to those core correctional practices, also known as skill-based supervision, revisiting or visiting the question of, even if, and this is very important, and this did not come through in any of the responses that I read this last week, even in the face of a very brief interaction between an officer and a client, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or as you saw in the Bonta article, an average of 22 minutes. Is it possible to help influence behavior in that short amount of time? The evidence that you've been assigned to read, the empirical articles that you have been assigned to read, investigate that question. Is it possible to help influence behavior? It's an extremely important question, and it has great implications for the field as a whole. It has great implications on what we can expect from probation officers in their daily practice. So again, getting back to the question, in addition to those two articles, Trotter and Bonta et al., you've been assigned 3 new articles, which I detailed a little bit, profiled a little bit towards the beginning of this video. So you will have, if you've done all the reading, you will have a pretty good knowledge base about what we mean when we say skills-based supervision, when we talk about evidence-based practices, when we discuss things like core correctional practices. So keep this in mind. You're really reading some material, even though it's a few years old at this point. It's still very much on the cutting edge of the field when it comes to community supervision, both research and practice. Really, at this point in time, we're 5 weeks in. All I can do in an effort to encourage you to help to keep improving your writing is to review everything that I've sent out via video and email before. I don't know what else I could say that I wouldn't be repeating myself. You need to make sure you proofread your material. You need to make sure that you make it evident that you read and thought about and really struggled with and critically analyzed the material. You need to make sure that you answer the question. You need to not go off on a tangent. A handful of you are still consistently, bringing your answer back to the same axe that you were grinding on week 1, whether it applies to the subject matter of the week or not, and that's not going to certainly won't result in full credit. So please keep that in mind as you formulate your answers for this week. You need to make sure your writing is of a high quality. Again, this is an upper level undergraduate course, and as such, the quality of your writing is going to become under scrutiny and more and become more critical as the semester wears on. So, all right, good luck. Make sure you do your reading, read it closely, and I look forward to seeing your submissions. I'm going to set up your discussion forums now. Thank you.